The blizzard had swallowed everything. Fences vanished. Trees bowed low under the weight of white silence. The sky pressed close, gray and heavy, like it didn't want to let go. Clara Whitmore had just finished nailing, shut the last of the shutters when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not ice breaking loose from the roof, not the old barn groaning in protest. A cry, faint, high-pitched, human. She froze, breath clouding in front of her lips. Then she heard it again, closer this time, fragile, desperate, like a heartbeat breaking through the storm. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing her coat, she pushed through the front door and into the whiteout. The wind clawing at her like it had a grudge to settle. She moved by instinct, not sight, her boots crunching over ice and memory. 10 steps past the paddock, she nearly tripped. Something was there, half buried in snow, wrapped in a faded red cloth. The bundle moved, let out another soft, hoarse wail. Clara fell to her knees. It was a baby, barely breathing, skin cold as stone, a shallow cut on the forehead, frozen blood dried dark. The fabric wrapped around it bore patterns she recognized, Comanche symbols, handmade, sacred. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. She lifted the baby, held it against her chest, and ran. 3 days later, a shadow appeared on the ridge. Not alone. 100 warriors rode behind him, and Clara Whitmore was standing on the porch, with the baby still in her arms. The storm didn't break for another 12 hours, and neither did Clara. She sat through the night with the baby in her arms, rocking gently by the fire in a chair that had once belonged to her mother. She didn't sleep, didn't eat. Her body moved on instinct, the way her hands adjusted the blanket, the way she kept 2 fingers on the child's wrist to monitor the fading pulse. The fever came fast. It shimmered on the baby's skin like heat trying to fight through ice. She pressed cool cloths to the tiny forehead, whispered nonsense in a voice she hadn't used in years. The fire roared, dried her lips, made the walls sweat, but she didn't move. At first light, the child stirred. A weak cry, no stronger than a creak in old wood. But it was something. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her arms ached, her back screamed, but she kept rocking. And then the knocking began, not at the door, in her head. "What have you done?" By midday, the snow had softened to a dull, slushy quiet. The world outside looked like it had survived a war. Fences buried, trees broken, the windmill at the edge of the field leaning drunkenly westward. Clara changed the baby's wrapping. She did it slow, careful, eyes tracking every bruise and cut. The child, no more than 8 months old, had a gash on his temple and several small abrasions along his arm. But what made her heart freeze wasn't the wounds. It was the necklace, a small carved bone on a leather cord, symbolic, protective, and undeniably Comanche. She had lived near the Comanche territories all her life. Her late husband had traded horses with them before the war turned good intentions into suspicion. She remembered the signs, remembered the warnings. This child was a chieftain's son, or worse, a warrior's only blood. She bundled him tighter and stared out the window. No one had seen her bring him in. Yet, that afternoon she heard the hooves. Not many, just one horse. She moved the baby into the bedroom, tucked him beneath a wool quilt, and pressed a hand over his tiny chest until she felt breath. Then she stepped onto the porch. The rider was familiar. Eustace Carter, her nearest neighbor. 50 acres east and 3 drinks into madness on any given day. He stopped short when he saw her. "Clara," he said, voice sharp. "You all right?" Thought maybe the roof caved in. "I'm fine." "You sure?" "Fella in town said he saw tracks near your place. Fresh ones. Right before the storm hit." Clara's jaw tensed. "Maybe just my own." Eustace sniffed, eyes narrowing. "You see any strangers out here?" "Just snow." He gave a slow nod. "Well, you be careful. Word is a hunting party went missing last week. Comanche. Some say they were near the ridge. I'll keep my doors locked." "You do that." He didn't ride off immediately, just sat there a moment longer, squinting past her toward the cabin windows. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Finally, he turned his horse and rode back into the white. That night, the baby wouldn't stop crying. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't cold. He was scared. She held him close, walking slow circles around the small room, whispering lullabies she hadn't thought of in years. Songs her mother used to hum. Songs that once made her own son stop fussing before he— She caught herself. Before nothing. Before memory tried to dig up the grave she'd spent 5 years covering with silence. The child's fingers curled around her shirt. She didn't pull away. On the second day, someone else came. This time it was Mary Finch, the pastor's wife. Tall, nosy, brittle as burnt sugar. She brought bread wrapped in cloth and concern wrapped in curiosity. Clara forced a smile. "Storm, break your fence?" Mary asked, glancing toward the fields. "Part of it. Any help needed?" "No. You've been quiet. I like it that way." Mary looked toward the window. "Anyone? Stop by?" Clara tilted her head. "You mean anyone like who?" Mary's smile sharpened. "Well, you'd know if they had." Clara didn't flinch. She took the bread, said thank you, and closed the door without another word. Behind her, the baby stirred in the next room, and outside the sky darkened, like it knew what tomorrow would bring. That night, Clara made a decision. She couldn't hide the baby forever, not with neighbors sniffing like hounds and snow melting into the kind of mud that held tracks longer than memory, but she also couldn't give him up. The child had clung to her finger earlier that evening, his tiny grip stronger than it should have been. His eyes, dark and wide, followed her as if he already understood something she hadn't said aloud. He was watching. He was learning who she was. And for the first time in 5 years, Clara felt like someone was depending on her again. She stayed up sharpening the kitchen knife, not because she expected violence, but because she knew it would find her if it wanted to. She moved the rifle from the mantel to the table, loaded it, checked it twice, and then she waited. The wind shifted after midnight. The baby slept in a basket lined with wool and faith just beside the stove. Clara sat by the door, hand on the rifle, eyes on the snow. At some point she must have dozed, because she woke with a start to the sound of hoofbeats. 3 men, riders. Their outlines appeared like ghosts through the thin veil of pre-dawn mist. Not neighbors, not white men. They wore buffalo hides and paint across their cheeks. The horses didn't stomp or snort. They moved like shadows, intentional, focused. Clara didn't move, didn't reach for the rifle, didn't even breathe. One of them dismounted. He didn't approach the house. Instead, he walked slowly toward the chicken coop, knelt, and ran his hand through the snow. He was following something. Clara's heart sank. They know. But then he did something unexpected. He turned, looked directly at her window, and bowed his head once. Then he mounted again. The 3 men vanished the way they came, quietly, powerfully, like wind changing direction. She didn't tell the baby. She just picked him up, held him close, and whispered, "They know you're here, and they didn't take you. Yet." She wasn't sure if she was warning him or herself. The 3rd day came without warning. It arrived like judgment. The baby was sleeping peacefully when the sound rolled over the ridge, distant at first, like thunder, then louder, clearer, hooves, hundreds. Clara stepped out onto the porch. There, across the ridge, spilling like a black ribbon over the hills, was a sight no one had seen in 2 decades. Comanche warriors, 100, maybe more, silent, armed, mounted with perfect posture and intent. At their head rode a man draped in a red cloak, long braids, broad shoulders, a scar that traced his left jaw like lightning. He stopped 50 yards from her house and dismounted, alone. He walked the distance in measured steps, dust rising around his boots despite the wet ground. Clara stayed on the porch. The baby stirred in her arms. When the man reached the bottom of the steps, he looked up. Then he spoke. "You saved my son." Clara nodded once. "I did. He was left behind, not by mistake, by mercy. His mother died. The party was ambushed. We thought he had died too. I heard him cry," she said softly. "You heard my blood scream, and you answered." There was silence. Then he asked, "Will you give him back to me?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "Will you take him from me if I say no?" He blinked once. "No." I wasn't trying to keep him, she said, voice low, but I wasn't ready to lose him either. You did not lose him. You brought him back. Clara looked down at the child. He doesn't even cry anymore when I hold him. The man nodded, then stepped forward, held out his hands. But instead of taking the baby, he simply touched the boy's foot, gently, reverently. He looked up at her again. You are now a part of his story. And what does that mean? He stood straighter. In our way, it means you are blood, and blood is never left behind. Then he turned to the ridge, raised a hand. One rider broke from the group, a woman, draped in blue, carrying something, a cradle board, the traditional way to carry Comanche infants, woven with leather, feathers, and protection symbols. But there was something else in the woman's hand, a necklace, the same as the baby's. The man took it, stepped back toward Clara. He didn't ask permission. He simply moved slowly, lifted the baby's necklace, and replaced it with the one in his hand. This one was newer, brighter, a sign. I give him a new name, he said, and I give you a new name too. She raised an eyebrow. What name? He looked her dead in the eye. Mother who hears. When the warriors rode away, Clara stood on the porch, still holding the baby. He would go with them in the morning. She knew that now, but for one more night, he was hers. And that somehow was enough. Clara didn't sleep that night. She tried. She stoked the fire, fed the baby warm milk, even laid her head beside him on the worn feather mattress. But sleep wouldn't come, because now that she knew the boy had a name, a father, a place to go, she realized she wasn't ready to let him leave. Not yet. At dawn, frost had crept over the windows, painting them in fine filigree like lace spun from ghosts. Clara rose quietly, wrapped the baby in a soft shawl she hadn't worn in years, and carried him to the porch. The land was still, no hooves on the wind, no warriors on the ridge, just silence, and the deep, aching weight of goodbye. She rocked him slowly, pressing her lips to the crown of his head. Little Hawk, she whispered, that's what I would have called you. The boy stirred in his sleep, brow twitching gently, like he was dreaming of someplace warmer, softer. And then from the tree line came the sound of hooves, but only one. The rider was the woman from the day before. No cloak, no feathers, just a rough wool shawl, a bundle of cloth, and quiet eyes like still water. She dismounted without a word and approached the steps. Clara rose, baby in arms, and met her gaze. His father? She asked. The woman shook her head. He waits. He does not wish to take him from your hands. That is not the way. Clara swallowed hard. I suppose I should say something. The woman tilted her head. He already heard you, when you stepped into snow to lift what death had left behind. Clara didn't speak, didn't move. Her arms didn't want to let go. So the woman stepped closer, gently, slowly, and reached out. But the baby cried. Not a wail, not distress, just a soft, half-waking murmur, as he twisted and buried his face in Clara's collarbone. She froze. So did the woman. And then Clara spoke. Can I see where he'll go? They rode together. Clara on her old mule, the baby bundled close against her chest. The woman rode beside her, not speaking, but not judging either. They crossed the creek, wound through the pines, climbed toward a rise that opened onto a small clearing. And there, beneath the rise, sat the encampment. Tents made of hide and wood, smoke curling from a fire pit, children running barefoot in the wet snow, dogs barking lazily in the sun. A village, a life. The warriors weren't all there anymore. Most had moved on, dispersed like storm clouds after a purpose passed. Only the red-cloaked man remained, seated by the fire. He rose as they approached. No weapons, no ceremony, just eyes fixed on the child. And something else, a tremble in his throat when the baby looked up at him. The woman dismounted first, moving to the fire. Clara remained still, the boy against her chest. Then slowly she got down and carried him the final steps herself. When she reached the father, she didn't speak. She just looked at him, long and steady, and whispered, You waited. I didn't know if you would. He took the child and nodded. I wait for what is mine, and I wait for what is sacred." The boy didn't cry. He simply looked up, as if he recognized something older than memory. The man held him with both arms, his fingers shaking slightly. Clara stepped back, but he stopped her, held out a hand, and in it, an object wrapped in cloth. She opened it. Inside was a carved medallion of bone and turquoise, a pendant worn by clan protectors, a symbol of guardianship. "He will know your name," the man said. "I already do," came a voice behind them. It was the woman. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "In our tongue, we do not call you the white woman who saved him. We call you Natuanea, she who walks between worlds." Clara lowered her head. She didn't cry, not then, but she held the pendant tight in her palm, felt the shape of something she didn't yet understand, and whispered, "Then tell him, I didn't just save his life." She looked up. "He saved mine." That evening, Clara rode back alone. No baby in her arms, no sound but the wind in the trees, but the fire in her house never felt warmer, and the silence never felt less lonely. She placed the pendant above the mantel, where sunlight touched it each morning, and every Sunday she baked a loaf of sweet cornbread. She made two, one for herself, and one left on a flat stone by the creek. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the baby was carried away in his father's arms, since Clara stood in the clearing and watched the fire catch his cheeks like gold, since her house became silent again, but not empty. The baby's crib still stood by the stove. She hadn't moved it, didn't dust it either. She let it stay with the smell of ash and wool and milk, a quiet altar to something real, something warm, something lost and not lost. Each morning she walked to the creek, left her cornbread on the flat stone, didn't look back, didn't wait to see if it disappeared, but it always did. On the 15th day, the hooves returned. She knew the sound now, not thunder, not attack, just presence, purpose. She was sewing near the window when she heard them, slow, even hoofbeats, approaching not from the ridge,